So the project started thinking about, what would it look like to have developmentally sensitive care in in the foster care system for adolescents. And with the help of Judy Smetana at the University of Rochester, Carol and others began thinking about what kinds of expertise would we want to have to begin to ask that question: what would developmentally sensitive care look like? What kind of backing would we need to have that? Yeah, they began to have initial discussions about what kinds of areas of expertise would be important to inform developmentally sensitive practices for foster care. And then they began, this is before I was there. Luckily, I was invited to be part of this, but they began identifying these experts, vetting them, making sure they were interested. And I think I can say that virtually everyone that was asked to be a part of this, I think virtually everyone said yes. I mean, it's an opportunity for researchers who, we sit in our offices and in our labs, and an opportunity to take our research and have it maybe mean something on the ground, have it implemented. And for us, that's just a really wonderful and exciting thing. And so they brought together a group of us in New Orleans and in February 2024 for a meeting where we shared all our research on various aspects of adolescence, um, just normative adolescence, what adolescents need to thrive and grow in general. And ultimately, it became this consensus statement that hopefully some of you have read, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, just to give you an idea of the kinds of topics that need to be thought about and were brought together to understand what adolescents would need are some things about intrapersonal process, things in the adolescent, their neurological and biological development. We need to understand the specific characteristics of adolescents' brain development, what's happening there, what are their changes in sleep patterns, how do they regulate stress, and what are the challenges there. We need to understand interpersonal processes, relationships between people, parenting, parent-teen relationships, sibling relationships, peer relationships. We need to understand those things through the lens of attachment, the need for connectedness, the need for autonomy to have a say in things, conflict and closeness, peer relations. So all of those lenses. In order to understand what adolescents need, we also have to think about the broader social context in which adolescents find themselves, issues of schooling, issues of extracurricular activities, which become so important to many adolescents, the effects of neighborhoods, school transitions, all of these things. And then also, in order to understand what adolescents need, we need to understand the experience of urban youth, of minoritized youth, what it is like specifically for them, um, and the importance there of cultural identity, of the impact of racism, of inequality on adolescents' experiences. So all of those areas were represented on the ground in that meeting. So just to get a little bit more specific, coming out of that meeting in New Orleans, we had some recommendations again for what it would take to what it takes to give adolescents developmentally sensitive experiences. We need to foster self-regulation. We need to foster high quality sleep. Talked a lot about sleep. We need to foster positive interpersonal relationships. We need to foster a sense of security for adolescents in their connections with close others. We need to foster a sense of autonomy, a sense that they have a say in what's happening to them and they're just not pawns in the world. We need to foster a sense of relatedness with important others, including siblings. Um, we need to support school transitions, possible school transitions if they're going to different schools. We need to maintain participation in extracurricular activities. And we need to help foster teens' cultural and social identities. So all of these recommendations for what it would look like to have what adolescents in general need. And then the discussion in New Orleans was about how does that relate to the foster care system, what kinds of things um, are us learning about the foster care system and putting those two things together. What would it look like? And out of all of that came the paper. And that paper, this white paper, which eventually did get published, which was great, was before it went anywhere, it was presented to a variety of different sets of people, including uh, uh, people, lots of different groups with lived experiences, the youth with experiences in foster care, foster parents, birth parents, and the group it had a we were really excited that it had a really positive reception. There was some feedback, but yes, this is what we want to do. This is what we want to foster in adolescence. So yeah, I'm just going to focus in a little bit on two of the areas that we were really prioritizing as we thought about what would developmentally sensitive care look like in adolescence in the foster care system. And the two that we're really prioritizing here were attachment and autonomy. So when we talk about attachment, we're talking about the need of adolescents to have a sense of security and connectedness in their relationships. They need to feel like people that they have trust in others, that they can count on others. When they say they're going to do something, they're going to do it, and so forth. That they are connected and cared about. That others are responsive to them and caring and have their well-being at heart. So that in order to have, so it's so important. We just don't thrive when we don't have this sense of security. And so, in order to facilitate that secure attachment, the people around adolescents want to listen and understand. They want to connect adolescents with important others and keep those connections that are so important to them. They want to express a lot of caring and respect. So that those principles are all principles we took very seriously for whatever recommendations we were going to move forward. And the other issue is autonomy. Again, uh, autonomy is a sense of that you are choosing what you do. You have a say in what you do. You're agentic. You're not just passive. And I just want to say, somebody said this before in another of our meetings. Autonomy and independence are different things. Independence is doing things on your own, but autonomy is a feeling that you have a say in what's going on. That you have some volition. And so when we feel autonomy, we feel that people understand our own perspectives. We can't feel like they're taking into account our voice if they don't understand where we're coming from. So feeling like your perspective is understood, feeling like you have some choice and volition about what you do rather than feeling pushed and coerced all the time. That you're an active participant in problem solving rather than somebody solving their problems for you. And so when we create an environment that supports autonomy, we create an environment that takes other people's perspectives to try to figure out, well, from your point of view, what does this seem like? It allows for opinions and dissension. We can't always do what adolescents want us to do, and but we can hear them and honor their opinions and perspectives, and we can actively involved in solving problems with them rather than for them. And all of these things can make a really big difference in uh, in um, in adolescent development and adjustment. So, with all this knowledge, uh, and the initial thing was that white paper giving those recommendations on what would developmentally sensitive care look like. We embarked on this project with, as I said, with Carol and QPI, and then with Citrus, to think about what would it look like, and we're tackling for entry into care. What would developmentally sensitive entry into care look like for adolescents? Um, and so one of the things we knew and we learned very quickly is that we had a lot to learn as researchers about the foster care system. We spent a lot of time uh, learning about what the system is from various viewpoints. We met with Citrus. We met with the QPI leadership. We had hours and hours long um, meetings where we brought where we met with youth who had been in care. We met with trauma therapists. We met with birth parents. We heard about the intake process. We heard about placement case managers. We heard from foster parents. So just to really to learn about the process, and because you can have these principles, but if you don't really understand what it's like on the ground, they you can't put them into place. And we also took a deeper dive. Also, we did some focus groups with the Youth Advisory Council. We also had a focus group with parents, and all of these things to just gather information about what it's really like on the ground, so that we could take that into account as we developed specific plans to take what was in the white paper and take these principles and and develop a pilot program to change or to see how we could add this to make the entry into care being a little bit more developmentally um, sensitive. And we focused in what we were planning on those two issues of attachment and developing trust and autonomy, feeling heard, maintaining attachments, fostering a sense of that adolescents were had some agency in their lives, and so forth. And so all of those things went into a set of recommendations that we came up with that we then um, presented. And I'll tell you a little about that in a minute. So, yeah, so these are the recommendations for a more developmentally sensitive approach to adolescents' entry into care. So, I'm going to go through each of them, and then uh, I can tell you about how we got together. The most important part of this is that we got together with Citrus and Youth Law Center and talked through really the realities of all this. So, our first recommendations centered around attachment and trust. And what we noticed when we were hearing about all the system of entry is that adolescents would see many people. One person would interview them, one person would take them to the uh, would transport them, one person, and then one person would be their caseworker. Um, probably our biggest recommendation was to try to assign a consistent representative of the system to take the adolescents through the placement process. Someone who would start really early on, and that would be that point person who would hear about what their concerns were, who would provide information. That person would be consistent, so they would develop a sense of trust in that person and prevent a lot of confusion and misunderstandings. And we noticed that adolescents were having to tell their story to a lot of different people, and by a certain point, they probably stopped telling their story. So this would be a way for that to consolidate that. So that's probably the biggest recommendation, and we can we'll tell you what happened with that. And Kim, I'm sure, has a lot more to say about this. The second was to offer youth an opportunity to have a trusted person to accompany them through the placement process. So this would be either a friend or a relative who would be there for maybe the initial interview or soon on after that, would help them to be able to remember to say X, Y, and Z about what was important to them, to feel the support and the connection that they need to go through this. So that would be a second recommendation. A third recommendation was to develop a cadre of former foster youth to support the youth through the placement process and beyond. So this would be a group of former foster youth who would be able to help the adolescent know what to expect and to give them a sense of like what is okay and what is not okay. If you see this in the foster care in your placement, this is expectable, or if you see this, that's not expectable, and then this is something that you should let people know it's not okay. So having that source of support of people who have been there, we thought would be a really good way to help foster both attachment and autonomy. The next recommendation was to allow youth to speak to their parents as soon as possible. Now, we learned that speaking to the parents is part of the protocol typically, but that might happen later in the process or different times. And so, having them speak to their parents as soon as possible creates the keeps that connection going, prevents them from having to worry about their parents and knowing that they're okay, and um, and and can give them a more sense of security that their parents know what's going on with them. The next one was to develop a protocol for the first meetings with youth to allow them to express their needs and preferences. So this would be in the earliest interviews possible, asking them about what they think is really important, what they see as deal breakers for them in terms of a foster family. Now, of course, we'll always have to, as you know, be practical, and we learn this so clearly that you can't always give the adolescent all the things that they would like. There just isn't enough foster families to go around, but we can hear them and we can let them know that we're trying. Asking them about, is it important to go to the same school, or would they like to go to a different school? Are they allergic to pets, or do they love pets? Do they want to keep being able to do their religious activities or their extracurricular activities? So all of these questions could be asked, and we developed a protocol for asking those questions to adolescents as early on as possible. And another one was to provide youth an opportunity to meet the foster family before being placed. And that isn't supposed to be an opportunity for the foster family to reject the adolescent, but it's a time for them to get together to get an idea of what's expected on either side, to give foster parents an opportunity to set up some things that will make the placement more likely to be successful. So maybe I'll stop sharing and just chat the rest out. Because that's the Oh, actually, if I stop, I can start sharing again in a few weeks. You know what? I'll leave it. I'll leave it. I guess they'll be up for after. So the researchers, who were Judy Smetana, Joe Allen, and Gustavo Carlo, and I had the opportunity to come to um, Miami and meet with Kim's incredible team. Um, and so many people were there and from all aspects, and to present these recommendations and discuss them with the team. And I can't tell you how important that was. It's one thing to have these ideas and in the abstract, and it's another to be given, to understand the real world circumstances that can allow for this, and how they allow for this or how they don't allow for this. We discussed each recommendation in turn, and we spent perhaps the most time on the first one. Like, who could be this consistent representative of the system to take the adolescent through the process? So it was developing this relationship, and and we learned that it might be possible to use the caseworker. That caseworkers could get involved really early in this particular instance, and they might be able to be the one that goes through. But problem solving around who could this be, and then the realities of the world, that actually might not be the very very first person that they come in contact with. It might be the trauma therapist, for example, and so we need to take that into account. But by being together and sharing our information, we're able to really problem solve there. So then after the meeting, more thought about logistics. We developed a set of rationales for why these changes. If we're going to ask people to do things differently, we don't want to just give them the recommendations. We want to tell them why. We want to give them some backdrop of why this is developmentally sensitive care. And so thinking about that, we developed some scripts, not to be used in strictly, but just some ideas about what an interview with the adolescent who comes in contact with the youth first might talk to about them. making sure that and things that we want to make sure. We want to make sure they know that none of this is their fault, that the team really cares about them and is prioritizing their well-being, and that we want their input. We want their feedback. We can't do this without them, and making sure that they know that. Again, meeting ideas with logistics, um, figuring out who that might be. If it's a trauma therapist, then that person might need a script themselves. And so just trying to really problem solve and share with each other. So, in all, just personally, it's been a very eye-opening experience. It's such a satisfying experience to bring science to real-world applications, and for this very, very important area. It really gave us as researchers the an appreciation of what you all do and the complexities out there in the system, the realities of the situation on the ground. And I've said it many, many times, we are wowed all the time by the level of commitment that all of the people we came in contact with have to better the experience and lives of youth. And the Citrus team has been so inspiring, as has the QPI and the Youth Law Center. And yeah, it's been an honor to work with them, and we're looking forward to continuing.
So thank you so much, Wendy. It has been an honor to be working with you. I want to make a couple of points and then turn this over to Kim. One is, just to clarify, the researchers were not telling us what adolescents in foster care need. They were telling us what any adolescent needs. And that, I may have said this to some people in this room 100 times, but I'll say it 100 more. A young person in foster care is a young person who happens to be in foster care. And what they need is going to be very similar to what any other adolescent needs, because every adolescent has something that makes them different. In this case, can be trauma and dislocation. It might be a big thing. Some people have special abilities. Some people have exceptionalities. Some people are especially shy. Some people are especially outgoing. So we wanted to know, what would any adolescent need? And I think we've done really great on this. And I think the people with lived experience, it helps them appreciate that things that are happening to them would happen to any adolescent who had to go through this system. It's nothing about them personally. I mean, there is trauma, et cetera, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is that the system hasn't been developmentally sensitive. And the second thing I want to say before I turn it over to Kim is, we intentionally started with the very front end. We intentionally did not start with who is the most troubled adolescent in your system. Let's work with them first. What we want to do is avoid having people become the most troubled adolescent in your system. And what the researchers have shown us is that we did not set the system up in such a way as to encourage or make success more likely. Instead, a lot of the elements of this system make the young person's ability to cope with it successfully even harder. And there's no one better to talk about this than Kim McGrath, who has done amazing work with adolescents before she was doing this at Citrus, and is now running the programs for child welfare at Citrus. So I'm turning it over to you, Kim.
Hi, Carol. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all awake there. We can't really see you, but I hope we're engaging you. I want to start by saying how grateful Citrus is to the Youth Law Center for allowing us this opportunity to work on this incredible pilot with this just amazing group of researchers. This has been a wonderful experience for our agency and for the system of care in Miami-Dade and Monroe. So I want to give you a little bit of a context, because we're going to talk about the implementation. So if we just so that you know a little bit about our agency and a little bit about the system of care where we're going to be implementing. So Citrus has been in the Miami-Dade community providing behavioral health services since the 70s. We were a community mental health center, and then we evolved into a federally qualified health center where we started providing primary care services and expanded into supportive housing. So our roots are in behavioral health. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because in 2019, Florida is privatized. So many of you are familiar with the privatized child welfare system. We became the child welfare lead agency. When we became the child welfare lead agency, we were fully committed to fully integrating behavioral health and child welfare. So those practices needed to be fully integrated. And we were also committed to integrating the voice of lived experience into every aspect of our system. So a little bit, next slide, Wendy. A little bit about the privatization. So for those of you who may not be familiar, we are Citrus Health Network. We are basically the lead agency, kind of the umbrella agency for child welfare services in Miami-Dade and Monroe. And what that means is that we do prevention services, but those youth must have DCF involvement. So DCF does in our state the private and get the protective investigations. So we provide all services post-investigation for children in the child welfare system. That includes the foster parent recruitment and licensing, placement, adoptions, extended foster care, independent living. And we contract with full case management agencies to provide the quality case management. So our full case management agency partners, there's 3 in Miami-Dade County, Family Resource Center, the Village South, and Wesley House Family Services. And then Wesley House Family Services also provides full case management for us in Monroe County. This is important because as I'm talking a little bit about the implementation of the pilot, we have decided to start with implementation with one full case management agency, which is the Village South. They're actually our newest case management agency. So we wanted to implement these really what we think is pretty profound changes with a agency that's just developing their policies and procedures. And then hopefully after 6 months or so of success, then we will be able to expand to all of our full case management agencies. Next slide. So one of the first things that we did, again, because we were committed to fully integrating behavioral health and child welfare, is we were also very focused on the front end of our system, which is also why this pilot was just a really good fit for us at Citrus. We noticed that youth in Miami-Dade County, when they were being removed from their home by protective investigators, they were often riding around Miami-Dade in the PI's cars or going back to their offices while placement was being located for them. So when we became lead agency, we wanted to eliminate that right from day one, and we developed what's called the Children's Reception and Intake Base, the CRIB. It's a safe, child-friendly, child-focused environment, and it's set up to really meet the immediate needs of a youth once they have been removed from their family of origin. And the second component of the CRIBs is that we developed what's called trauma transition therapists. These are well-trained clinicians that go out into the field with protective investigators when there is going to be a removal. When it is possible and safe to do so, they go to the site of removal and then accompany the youth back to the CRIBs while the youth wait for placement. If it's not possible for them to be on the site of removal, because unfortunately we do sometimes have immediate removals, our trauma transition therapists meet the youth when they come into the CRIBs. We were really, really proud of this program. And one of the things that we learned with all of the amazing focus groups that the researchers did, that we were doing a good job at the front end of mitigating that trauma of removal and providing a supportive person for our youth when they were first coming into care. Our TTTs were providing a lot of encouragement, a lot of support, and the youth were hearing a lot of what we wanted them to hear initially upon removal. But then unfortunately, once the youth left the CRIBs, we were kind of losing a lot of that progress that was made because we had transportation workers that were often picking the youth up. So they were exposed to a number of different folks. They would then get to the foster home and their case manager was not there with them. It was the transportation worker. And they may get some mixed messages. They weren't hearing the same information that our trauma transition therapists were providing for them. So that was really, it was great insight for us. It was a little disheartening to hear that we had thought we set up this great system. But we were then really receptive and excited about the pilot to see how we could make sure that the gains we were making from the beginning were being carried through the entire process. So when we were first approached about this pilot, we were definitely excited, but I will admit we were also a little bit hesitant because we know that there tends to be at times a mismatch between research and practice. And we were concerned that due to the complexity of the child welfare system, that we were going to hear some great recommendations, but then we weren't going to be able to implement them. So we were very grateful and excited to hear that this team was really receptive to hear about our challenges and that they were willing to help us overcome what could be potentially barriers or obstacles to implementation. So I know that Wendy mentioned that convening that we had in April in Miami, but that was really very important for our system of care as well, so that they could hear the researchers' recommendation. And to have such, exceptional researchers with the background and the wealth of knowledge that they have presenting to our team, it really gave credibility to those recommendations and gave folks, an understanding of why it was so important that we were going to make some changes, which may seem simple, and I'm going to explain some of the challenges that were actually a little bit challenging to implement, but will be so well worth it once we're fully implemented. So the system buy-in after that meeting, I think, was exceptional. Our system of care partners, from our foster parents to our full case management agencies, basically to everyone that was involved, were fully committed to this project after they saw the researchers' willingness to work with us and continue to work with us during implementation. Wendy shared the recommendations, and what we have put together is 3 committees at Citrus to help us with the implementation. I'm going to go into those committees in a minute. But the first thing that we decided was that, yes, that case manager would be the youth's trusted person and would be present with them at the cribs, and would then also transport them to their placement. They would be the one that would come out. They would meet with the TTT. They would have an exchange of information with that TTT to know what information had already been shared, so the children weren't having to repeat their stories, so that they were getting consistent messaging with that script, and that case manager, who would be with them through the life of their case, hopefully, would be the one that would then bring them to their foster home. They would have that conversation with the foster parent and also share all of that information with the foster parent. That seemed like such a simple change, but I do want folks in the room to understand who may not be familiar, but we accept children 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So to be able to implement that, it does mean changing policies and processes, both at the lead agency and our intake department, and also at the case management agency level. The second recommendation that we are implementing from day one is that the youth may identify someone that they're close to, which could be the family member, a friend, or a teacher, to accompany them through the removal process so that they don't feel alone. And this may not be someone who can physically be present, but could be present through the phone or Zoom, or that this youth could have access throughout this process. Recommendation number 3 we're fully committed to is that we will develop a cadre of former foster youth to support the youth through that first few weeks of care, and hopefully continue to be a mentor or support for them. This is a long-term goal for us. We want to focus on that kind of front end and developing our case management process and get that streamlined, and also identifying that family member or close friend. So we're planning on implementing this about 2026, 2027. And then the fourth recommendation that we'll be implementing is that the youth will have the opportunity to speak to their parents as soon as possible after placement. And that will be implemented by the comfort call. That will happen with the case manager, the trauma transition therapist, and the foster parents when they are placed. I mentioned that we have developed 3 committees: the training committee, the policy committee, and the research committee. And in all of these committees, we are fully integrating members from the lead agency, Citrus, our full case management agency, the researchers, Youth Law Center, and also our lived experience voice. So we have brought into each of those committees our foster parents, our youth representative, and our bio parents. And again, it's really important in child welfare to have all those folks sitting at the table because they bring up challenges that we are not even often aware of. So we will be developing, we're in the process now of a written protocol, which lays out these new expectations for case managers. And I mentioned that it's a multi-step process. So those are new policies for us as lead agency because we do handle the intake process. But it also is new policies and processes for the folks at the case management agency. They're going to be taking folks off a rotating on-call system, for example. But making sure that they are available when they actually are up for a new placement, when a new child is going to be placed on their caseload, that they have the ability to be the person that picks up that child, which might mean that they are missing court hearings or different things. So it's a whole rotation of coverage that has to happen in their policies and procedures. The research team is working really, really closely with our training team. They're developing a video that explains the importance of the project and the why behind the project. For our case managers, we do have turnover in child welfare. It's unfortunate, but it happens. So we have to constantly train our folks about why this is so important. Why is it so important that that case manager be the person that is there from day one for these youth and that really supports this youth from the beginning? And they're also helping develop that script because those initial conversations can be tough with our youth. Even though our case managers are trained, they're bachelor's level folks, we want to make sure that they have a script to help them along with that process. They're also going to really, the training department is also working to develop the training not only for the case managers, but also for our trauma transition therapists so that they really understand kind of this new process as well. And again, why it's so important. We do have some turnover. We have some new therapists coming in as we expand programs, and we want to make sure that everyone is fully informed about the importance of this and why case managers need to kind of be the primary and how they can help support that. We have been really grateful for this process. We are looking forward to the changes. We are right now in the committee process. We anticipate that over the next 90 days, we should be able to complete that committee work. It is challenging. It's a system change that we've talked about, but it's definitely one that we think is going to be in the best interest of the children and in the best interest of our system of care. Our folks are excited about this change. We have heard from our case managers that this is the work that they want to do. One of the things I think that's happened in our system of care in Miami-Dade and probably in many other systems of care is as case managers shared that they were feeling overwhelmed and overworked, which they absolutely are. Case management is an incredibly hard task, and it's a huge job. We tried to put a lot of resources in place for them, and what we found is that we were actually taking them away from the work that they wanted to do. So we were providing specialists that were holding visitation with parents. We were providing transportation workers. And those were actually all the things that case managers love to do. What they need us to take away is the paperwork. So now that we're bringing this back to them, we are trying to find ways that we can make sure they need the time to be able to do this. So we need to bring in other resources to support them with all of that paperwork. So system change is definitely hard, but it's exciting. And we have really valued this relationship with both the Youth Law Center and our research team. And we have a good commitment from our system that this is a positive change that we're looking forward to.
So thank you so much, Kim. What Kim missed on her slide was just that we're also doing evaluation. She has a wonderful continuous, is it a CQI team that is very research oriented, and we're hoping that we will be able to disseminate results, not just on what was the change, how did we make the change, but also how did it actually impact the experience of young people and foster parents in the system. So that's it. I think that we're kind of at the end of our official time. I don't know what you want to do about questions over there. We started a little bit late, but this gives you a chance to get back on schedule. So Carol, back to you.
Carol, would you and the panelists have a few minutes for questions?
Sure, we have time if you have
Okay.
time.
Hello, and my name is Priya Elavat from Reno, Nevada, Washoe County. Thank you for that fantastic presentation and research that you've put in the effort. I can't even imagine how many challenges and how you've managed to do that. It's not an easy one. So thank you very much for doing something like that. Even though if it is for adolescents, not for children, foster children and adolescents, but I mean, it's very similar, a lot of things. I had a question. Maybe all of you or Wendy could, when she was presenting at the slide, recommendation for attending to the developmental needs of children in foster care, that slide. Under that, you had a neurological and physical development, which is a huge part, as we all know. That's changing the child from the beginning, from inside, from inward. You mentioned self-regulation. I was curious about what kind of services, evidence-based alternative services we are implementing for the aspect of self-regulation. And I loved how you differentiated between autonomy and independence, and how autonomy is more to me, it's more inward looking and becoming strong within. It's more self-empowering yourself. And self-regulation is a huge part of self-empowerment. And what are the tools of self-empowerment that we are standardized or evidence-based that we are providing as a standardized procedure to the children, which are much more affordable? And I'll give you two examples which I do personally and which have given me immense benefit as a resource parent, and that is breath work, which is an evidence-based tool from Harvard. A lot of studies from Harvard and and Yale have been done, and nature. These are affordable, and could we standardize these, and are we providing them as a must, not if and when? So those are some of my questions. What are the tools of self-regulation and self-empowerment that we are doing already, among all the wonderful other stuff that you mentioned?
I could say some things in the abstract of what helps self-regulation, but maybe, yeah, Kim, if you have programs in place, that would be probably a better answer.
So I can't say I have one program in place. We have licensed the trauma transition therapists are licensed clinicians that meet with the children. And they are really doing obviously crisis intervention initially because these children have just been removal from the home is a trauma. It's an additional trauma that these children experience when they come into child welfare. So our licensed clinicians are initially engaged in basically critical incident type work. But they do start a lot of that self-regulation talk with the youth at that point, and do teach techniques to the youth to help them cope while they're at the cribs, and that they can then transition to their first placement with. The children are then linked to licensed therapists in the community. If a child is in acute crisis, our trauma transition therapist will stay and actively continue to work with them until that linkage is made and the new therapist is actually assigned, and then they'll have a handoff session with that new therapist. So that treatment tends to be very individualized for our youth, and really is based on the clinical recommendations of the treating clinicians. But a lot of the techniques that you talked about, the breathing, meditation, self-talk, all of those things tend to be techniques that our clinicians are using with our youth.
Okay, thank you. And there is sky breath work, diaphragmatic belly breathing, which have been known to mitigate trauma and those effects. So I hope we could use those affordable tools of self-regulation, where the child is not depending outward on talk therapy on an outside individual, but he already carries it wherever he goes with him.
Absolutely. And there's some incredible apps too that our trauma transition therapists, like most of our children that come in, it's amazing how young they are that they come in with phones. They may not be connected, but they're accessible to Wi-Fi,
Right.
especially for diaphragmatic breathing, where the apps will help and kind of walk them through some visual imagery apps. They're really great. So that if they're alone and they're struggling, but they don't want to reach out to someone, they can actually pull up those apps, and our therapists do share all of that with them and load them on their phones.
Thank you very much.
And I might just like one of the interesting things like we talked about in terms of brain development, in adolescence, there are multiple parts of the brain. One is the more emotional kind of part, and the other is the more cognitive sort of reasoning kind of part. And with adolescents, there's a mismatch sometimes that the emotional part is a little bit stronger than that reasonable cognitive part. And adolescents, they need help. They need help. They need some guidelines and limits, but in a way that helps them to feel moving toward what you're saying, moving toward that sense of they can rely on their inner resources and stop themselves when they need to. But that's an iterative process that we can help them with. So the kinds of things we discussed, about brain, specific things about brain development in adolescence, it might be different.
Thank you. We
Yeah.
have 2 additional questions. So, want to start here?
Hello. My questions are for Kim. I am just like blown away by this idea of the transitional trauma therapist. I remember being in situations of removals and feeling utterly unequipped to handle the enormity of emotion of this precious child in my car. So that just feels like profound. And I'm really excited that you guys are doing that. And to hear, I think you just said that they're licensed, right? Um, and also I heard you say that you're connecting them to licensed therapists. That's a struggle that we've really had of like all of our default therapy providers are interns for our children. And that is not enough in many, many situations. So that's been really difficult. So thank you for helping us imagine a possibility where maybe we get more licensed folks for our kids. So you already answered some of my questions. For the behavioral technician that you said, like what kind of credentials do they have? What is that level of provider?
So they are not degreed. They can be folks with a high school diploma, but they do get extensive training. They get over 40 hours of training on behavioral health techniques. And they work very closely with the trauma transition therapist. So they're there to assist with kind of the ADLs, the everyday needs of our youth. Unfortunately, our youth often come in, they have lice. They need to be bathed. So they really are there to make sure they're taking care of feeding them, nurturing them, so that our therapists can focus on the processing with the youth.
Wonderful. Super interesting. Thank you. And
I do want
and I
to
was
say one thing. I want to say one thing. We do sometimes refer to folks who are doctoral level interns or social work interns. So they can be in the process. They're always working under the supervision of a licensed individual. But I do want to throw out there that there's some great practitioners, like in training, that we will refer some of our youth to as well in the community.
Got it. Okay. And I forgot to say, I'm Cassandra. I'm from Orange County, California, with Patty and Tracy. And then I have one other question. Sorry. So the case managers, we use different language. Is that the assigned social worker, like for the whole family, or is that person different, just assigned to the child?
No, it's different places use different things, but it's the family safety case manager that's assigned to the family.
Okay. So just it made me think of imagining myself going in the middle of the night, so just the lifestyle that would be. I'm just curious how that will go, sustainability,
Right.
as far as like
So
when you have meetings scheduled the next day, but now you've been out unexpected. How are you planning to manage that?
So what we're planning on is that youth that come in during the daytime hours, 9 to 6, 7, probably 8 o'clock, if placement is identified, the case manager will place them immediately. If they come in after hours, we need some time to process at the cribs with that youth, with the trauma transition therapist. So they will be at the cribs, processing with the therapist, being taken care of by the behavioral health technicians, and then the next morning they will be placed by the manager. So it actually gives a little bit of, it alleviates some of the stress to the case managers, that they know that they will be doing this kind of during the working hours. And that they won't have to kind of respond overnight or weekends. Now, protective investigators that do the actual removal, they're different. They're the front end of the department. Our
Amazing.
transition therapists are the ones that go out to the removal. So if it's after hours, they'll be placed the next day by the case manager.
Thank you so much
So
for
can I
explaining.
s-
Super helpful.
We looked at this really closely, this overnight and weekend problem. And as you might suspect, it is many fewer kids than you think. I think, Kim, I don't know if you remember, I think it was about 1 in 3 months had come in the hours like Saturday late to Sunday. Very few kids actually come in these very late hours. Those are only serious emergencies. So it's less of a problem than we thought, but we still need to have a plan for it.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't want them to have to spend like the whole weekend at the cribs, because then they're being introduced to a number of different people. But it is just a very few kids that come in on Saturday, like late Friday evening and on Saturday.
My name is Melina, and I'm a resource and adoptive parent with Riverside County. I know this presentation was primarily for adolescents, but I feel watching it that all children could benefit from this. So I was wondering, I wanted to ask Kim if you're also implementing these strategies with like the younger youth, below teen.
Where it's any child that comes in, again, piloting with one case management agency right now, regardless of age, we'll be following this process. The research will only be done on the adolescents.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And I imagine the results have been really positive for all the kids, all ages, correct?
Well, we haven't implemented yet. We're in the
okay.
process, so we hope to implement soon.
Well, hopefully we can hear like your results once you have been able to start implementing this. Thank you.
I think we can. And to clarify, some of the recommendations, like obviously for a 4-year-old to pick somebody who they want to have go through this process, doesn't necessarily make sense. But when we say adolescents, we're talking about kids 10 and over. And when we get to this first case manager thing, we all believe, I think probably everyone in your room believes, that having a case manager come in right at the beginning and going all the way through is obviously the better way to do it. There are all kinds of logistical barriers, but the question is it worth it? But a lot of this should generalize to everyone. The checklist will be particularly the interview checklist, or the interview script, I'm sorry, which has bullets, would probably be particularly for adolescents. We might develop a different script for younger children.
Hello, my name is Rocco. I'm a foster youth from Riverside County. And my question to you is, when a lot of children are removed from homes, sorry, or 14-day noticed or immediately removed, they often think that it's their fault, or that it's something that has to do with them. And they internalize that, and they actually it makes it harder for them to feel that they can stay in other placements. And it makes it harder for them to find other placements due to the psychological behaviors that follow. So my question to you is, what will your org do to help with restorative practices to help them feel like being removed from their homes aren't a punishment, but more of a way for guidance to teach them what it is like to be a youth in care and being removed from homes? So is there any way you would be able to like direct that, or any specific policies that you could implement to make them feel more cared for and more supported?
I think you're absolutely right. That is something that has to be directly addressed from the very get-go. In the script, it talks about this is not your fault. And saying that directly to them and setting that from the very beginning. And I think that having this consistent person that you have this relationship with helps them to, and that gets reiterated, and they're treated like they are, like they they're they're cared for, they're respected, they're being nurtured, and together with the direct discussion of that issue with this trusted person, is a really good start to having it go in that right direction.
And that's some of the reason why we decided that we needed a script, because those kinds of things, one, that this is not your fault, this is not something you have done. Two, that this system is designed to help and protect you. You are not supposed to have to fit into the system. The system is supposed to support you. So when it's not supporting you, we really want you to speak out. Those kind of things, maybe the caseworker or somebody else interfacing with the youth thinks that's obvious, but nothing is obvious when it's your first time coming into a system. And I think, Rocco, you're making a really good point. Or when a child moves from one place to another. So we wanted to have a specific cue sheet, not a script where you have to say these exact words, but where you have to convey all these ideas so people don't forget. In the stress of we have to find a place to live and we have to move and we have to get ready for court, sometimes just basic human communication and what it feels like to be a kid gets lost. So I think we've really worked on that, and I would be happy, Rocco, or if you or anybody that you're working with wanted to look at that and say, I think we could say that better, we would be thrilled to have your input.
Thank you. And I have one more question. So oftentimes when foster youth are removed from homes or when they're being moved into new homes, the transition is really hard. They have to pack all their stuff within a specific notice time, and they have to start anew, go to new schools, find new friends, have new caseworkers or new social workers, depending on what county they're moved to. And on top of that, they have to read the case plans and the case reports that the former workers do write for them, and that can just be draining. It makes foster youth feel like they don't belong, and it makes them feel that it's not going to get better. So my question is for your guys' resource teams and your therapy teams is, how can you implement practices to talk about those things without also re-traumatizing the youth? Because I know it's hard to get youth to open up and talk about specific traumatic factors of their moves. So is there anything that you guys would be able to implement to make sure that they feel safe to communicate with the therapists who work with your org?
Kim, if you have, could you answer that? Because this is obviously your field.
Yeah. You are 100% correct. I think also integrity of items, right? Every time youth move, sometimes they unfortunately lose some items that are so important to them as well. We have an entire separate work group working on that because that's so valuable. One of my personal pet peeves and something we've worked really hard as an agency with is that children should not have to change clinical teams just because they moved. From one part of a county to another. I mean, we have Zoom, we have so many resources now that we didn't even have 6 years ago, so that youth should be able to stay with trusted clinicians, and those relationships shouldn't disrupt just because they're moving. But one thing that I can't, so we're working on that and trying to make sure that that happens. But if a youth does have to change providers and a new therapist is assigned, we do not want these youth to have to share their histories over and over again. So making sure that we have transition sessions between clinicians is really critical and something that we really emphasize, so that youth, if they choose to share their history, they can, but if they don't have to. So it's definitely a work in progress. One of the pet peeves of mine is the integrity of their items, making sure that youth are moved with integrity and they have all of everything they want and need with them when they have to relocate. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And I think we have one final comment question and then we'll wrap up.
Good afternoon. Nice to see you all. Thank you for sharing. Carol, nice to see you. It's John Jack Russo, Statewide Director of Foster Care from Connecticut. Kimberly, your program you're
Hi.
talking about. Hi, nice to see you. Very intriguing to me. Just curious, the cribs, are there more than one crib? How long does it take someone to drive to a crib? Are the kids
Well,
sleeping there? Just real quick, are the kids sleeping there overnight if they're coming in after hours? And is the goal one night? And how often does it go longer than one night? And I believe you also said it's a three-parter. So I'm testing you right before lunch. I believe you said if they have a home, they go directly to the home and they don't go to the crib. So is that crisis worker then meeting them there later on?
mhm.
And then where is the QPI with the birth family and wherever they're being placed woven in to the crib in this transition?
Okay, wow, that's a long, okay, let me, if I forget anything.
Yes, we can remind you.
Uh,
I think I've got backup from the state of Connecticut that can help me.
Okay, so we're definitely trying to mitigate trauma, not create trauma. So if a youth is being placed with a relative who they have an existing relationship with, they do go immediately to the relative. And then our trauma transition therapists reach out to the relative and request, if they ask them if they're requesting assistance, and they do go out and meet in the relative's home. It's very unlikely that a licensed foster home is identified immediately upon removal in Miami-Dade County. It does take us a little bit of time. We want to make sure that we get the information from the youth, who are they comfortable with, from the parents, all, do they want a single family home, a double family home? What behaviors do we need to support? So most youth who go into licensed care, I will say all youth at this point, all youth that go into licensed care do initially come to the cribs. Our numbers are low for removals in the southern region. We're actually at a historically low point. We do try, we had a 4-hour goal from time that you enter the cribs until you are placed. COVID, we were doing great. COVID disrupted that goal a bit, but we do not do overnight placements in the true definition of the word. So basically in Florida, we might have a youth that comes in at 11 p.m. So yes, we do have an area for the youth, a bedroom decorated that the youth can sleep in. It's not really considered a placement because they're just coming into care and we're given so many hours to place that youth. But we do make sure that we have appropriate sleeping arrangements for our infants all the way up to 17-year-olds. So that the youth are comfortable while we take the time to provide, to transition them to the appropriate setting. We will be licensing our cribs, but only because we want to have the opportunity. There are instances where a youth will come into the cribs and then a family has been identified and it will take more than 24 hours for that home study to be completed. So we're basically moving a youth to a foster home for one night and then moving them again. That's not the best interest of youth. So we do have to get licensed so that they could stay with that treatment team, continue to process with their team, and then move to that family. So our goal has changed a little bit from that 4 hours. We do want to move in place within 12 hours. We are far exceeding that. I think we're between 6 and 8 hours at this point. Did I miss any of your questions?
How many cribs do you have and what's the average drive time to get to the crib?
So initially we started with 3. We had in the Miami-Dade County, we started in the north, central, and south. And we found that we did not need that many cribs because quite honestly, we were doing a great job at prevention and keeping children in out of home care. So we are down to 1 crib that is centrally located in our county, and the maximum drive time, not counting traffic, if they happen to be removed during the high peak rush hour, would be 40 minutes to the location. Now that's the maximum drive time.
The last part is the QPI. How do you weave that into what's happening at the crib? And thank you. I'm going to sit down. Appreciate your time and what you're doing.
Our trauma transition therapists are facilitating and being a part of both the shelter hearing. So when the TTTs go on site, if they happen to be able to be on site at the point of removal, they're also there to support the biological parents. We are now again, their primary focus is the youth, but they are there to provide support to the parents. We're continuing that the next day where the TTT is present at the shelter hearing. In Miami-Dade now, most of those are virtual, but they do go into the breakout rooms with both the child and the parents to support both. And then the TTTs are also involved in the comfort calls with the parents.
Thank you. So would everybody join me in thanking our amazing panel? Thank you for the extended time and the opportunity to learn about your research. And Carol, do you want to make a closing comment?
Just stay tuned to see. This is, even I've done this for a long time, and even I am just learning so much about the complexity of making change. But I think the strength is that we have somebody from every part of the organization working, as well as lived experience, foster parents, birth parents, youth, all participating in this. So it's taking longer than I hope. Everything takes longer than I hope, but I think it's going to be done really well and we'll have good evaluation. So thank you all for all of your attention.
Thank you again.